Thank you, Steve. Thank you to SCSC for inviting me to come and talk, and to Royal Holloway for hosting such a great facility. My name is Nick Reed. I run my company. It's called Reed Mobility. I'm independent, but I also work as the Chief Road Safety Advisor to National Highways, which is the organisation that operates the strategic road network, the motorways and main roads in England. I'm going to be talking today about self-driving vehicles and their safety. And that comes from my perspective, which my background is in psychology. And I studied perception, how people use what they see to guide their actions, and worked for many years at TRL, the Transport Research Laboratory in Crowthorne, where I was looking at driver behaviour, using their simulators, looking at the effects of fatigue, alcohol, drugs, distraction on driving ability. And I guess about 10-15 years ago, realising, well, if we could automate the driving task, all of those risk factors go away. So I started to push for that kind of research. Now, I think a lot of people, when they think of a self-driving car, might think of this vehicle. This was the first one that Google was testing in San Francisco. It's a Prius. It's got a spinning laser sensor on its roof, various other sensors mounted around the bodywork. And they announced in 2010 they'd been testing that. They'd done 140,000 miles of testing when they first announced the project. But I'd argue that's possibly not the first self-driving car. And in fact, TRL, Transport Research Laboratory, or the Road Research Laboratory as it was in those days, had this in the 1960s. It was genuinely a self-driving car, not a laser sensor on its roof, but a radar on the roof, and it could drive for itself. Significantly slower than walking pace, but it was capable of doing it. Those experiments matured into this vehicle, Citroën DS, beautiful car. You can probably just about see these two coils mounted on the front bumper there, and they would detect the offset of the vehicle from an electric cable buried in the road. And I've got a video showing that from a documentary about the DS.
The DS was so advanced that in 1960 it was chosen by the Transport and Road Research Laboratory as a test bed for a sort of autopilot for cars.
I've driven this car for hundreds of miles without touching the steering wheel.
A driverless steering system picked up electronic signals from sensors buried in the track and literally steered itself.
We used the Citroën DS because it had the only high-pressure hydraulic system which we could use to automatically steer the car. We could drive the car up to 80 miles an hour without touching the steering wheel, and 60 miles an hour in the snow, when it was more stable than the average driver.
So eventually through the 70s, that system was fitted to a Mini and a Ford Cortina and eventually a bus. And the idea, I think, was that buses could be operated driverlessly, following an electric cable buried in the road. But really, that process of building roads with electric cables buried in them and all the maintenance that would go along with that was what really killed this as an idea. So what happened then, so the next generation of self-driving vehicle was this type of thing, which was from the DARPA challenges. DARPA, the American research agency, they held competitions in the 2000s to test vehicles that could drive for themselves for a military purpose, so that, transporting personnel on the battlefield. That's where it started. It then got into the urban challenge, so driving in traffic environments and junctions and so on. And the winner of the urban challenge was this vehicle, a GM Carnegie Mellon University BOSS vehicle, they called it. And this set the template, again, with the various sensors mounted on the vehicle. And all of the teams from these DARPA challenges ultimately ended up forming the self-driving companies that we see in Silicon Valley today, the researchers that were involved in the competitions. So that was in the 2000s, and then in the early 2010s, UK government got interested, and I led a project called Gateway in Greenwich. Gateway, the italicized, it stood for Greenwich Automated Transport Environment, and that's me on this demo vehicle with Vince Cable and Claire Perry, ministers from the coalition government at the time. And the people involved from Greenwich said, this was in 2015, they said in 2012 Greenwich had 3 Olympic venues for the London Olympic Games, and there was more attention at the launch of this project than there was for the Olympic Games in Greenwich, which was incredible. There was many journalists there, And that's the reason why I'm looking off over this way, because I knew how poor this vehicle was. And I wanted to make sure it would stop before it got to the camera crews, which were just off to the right of this picture. But eventually we got to shuttle vehicles that were working on the Greenwich Peninsula. This is just by the O2, and you'll see in the next slide. And we were using this vehicle, which is a modified version of the Heathrow pod. So at Heathrow, this works in concrete channels. It's never going to encounter a pedestrian or cyclist or another vehicle. Here it's fitted with additional sensors so that it could operate in a free roaming environment. And it's so safe that it needed 4 people in high vis walking in front and behind it to make sure no one else got in its way. But now we did get to a stage where we were carrying people along the peninsula, and initially we had school children running in front of it trying to see if it would stop, and it did. And once they figured out that that's what it would do, the novelty wore off, and it just it would go about its business. So yeah, really great study. Another part of the project was this is the world's first delivery by self-driving vehicle, which was done in Greenwich in 2016, I think this was. I mean, it's not very exciting, people getting a box out of the back of a vehicle, but it was a self-driving vehicle operating in a residential area in Woolwich. So at that time, 2015, 2016, there was a lot of optimism about what was going to happen with self-driving vehicles. So Lyft, people will be familiar, it's a competitor of Uber in the US. They were saying they would start doing autonomous driving on fixed routes in 2018, low-speed autonomous in 2020, and then 2021, 2022, they've got basically 75% of their journeys being undertaken by fully autonomous vehicles in 2022. Clearly, that hasn't happened. And I think that had some effects on my friends at National Highways as well. So you're probably familiar with the Gartner hype cycle, the idea that there's an innovation trigger, a new innovation comes along, everyone gets really excited about it, really interested in all of the problems that this new innovation will solve, till you get to this peak of inflated expectations. And that's when the realization sets in of all the challenges that need to be overcome, the costs, the regulations that need to be adopted, all of the kind of embedded costs that need to be overcome. So you end up in this trough of disillusionment before you start to solve those problems and ascend to what Gartner calls the plateau of productivity. It's all horrible consultancy talk. But if you plot where self-driving vehicles are on this curve, I think in 2010, that was when the Google project was announced. There was a realistic prospect of self-driving vehicles on public streets. And then in 2016, I think was the peak of inflated expectations. And now we're down, sadly, in the trough of disillusionment, but with good prospects for the future. And so my work for National Highways is about how they can achieve Vision Zero, the elimination of death and serious injury from the strategic road network. That ambition was announced in 2015, and we're down here. I think they were really assuming that self-driving vehicles would be in play by 2025, 2030, when in fact it will take much longer than that before they are a significant component of our everyday lives. But it's really important that we do something about implementing this kind of technology. There's quite a traumatic video I'm about to show, so if you don't like car crashes, look away. But this is one that Thames Valley Police released, and the family allowed it to be released to show the dangers of poor driving behaviours. And I use it to illustrate the sort of bad things that result in death and serious injury on the roads. So if I click, it should play. So you see this transit van here, sort of quite aggressively overtaking the first car, and we're coming up a hill, and the vehicle waits behind the camera car and chooses the overtake just at the peak of the hill, and then smashes into a Ford Fiesta coming the other way, and a 78-year-old man died in the oncoming vehicle as a result of that. So people make some pretty bad decisions about how they drive, and that's one of the reasons why self-driving vehicles are, there's enthusiasm about them to improve safety. And I wanted to kind of illustrate where we are with safety. So this is the stats for the EU, annual road deaths across the European Union, starting in the turn of the millennium, so in 2000, 2001. And it's a really positive story. I mean, it's obviously far too many people dying, but the numbers were decreasing more or less year on year, down to about 30,000 in 2010. And in 2011, it was the start of the UN Decade of Action for Road Safety. And what happened at that point? Well, the trend would have seen us down here at about 10,000 deaths in Europe by 2019. But in 2013, it's effectively plateaued ever since. And so something weird is going on there. I think there might be many reasons for it, but I think a couple of them might be. This 2010 was around the start of the trend for SUVs. So less stable vehicles, more weight in those vehicles, more energy in the crashes that happen. Therefore, when crashes do happen, they're more likely to result in death or serious injury. So that's possibly one reason why this plateau effect has happened. And the other reasons around the introduction of smartphones, a device, laser targeted at attracting our attention. So we get the distraction effects of drivers and also of pedestrians as well. So overlook that. And also sat-navs becoming ubiquitous. That's quite an interesting one. When there's congestion, a sat-nav will reroute you to try to maintain your arrival time. But what that ends up doing is sending traffic down roads that weren't necessarily designed to cope with the weight of traffic they then experience because of being rerouted by the sat-nav. So instead of people being on the main road, they're going down side streets, urban roads where you're more likely to encounter pedestrians, cyclists, children. And so potentially that is another reason why we've seen this plateauing. So even though vehicles may be getting safer, the incidents are more frequent or maybe more severe when they do occur. Okay, so moving on to self-driving vehicles and the need for safety. This slide I wanted just to use to sort of show the parallels between how humans drive and how a computer drives a vehicle. So we both have senses. So for the human, it's eyes, ears, touch, proprioception, the sense of movement is a part of our understanding of how we control the vehicle. Our brain pulls those sensory information together and then combines that with our knowledge of the driving rules, the highway code, and our knowledge of the road environment in which we're driving. So, familiar roads, we can use our experience of those roads to choose how we drive the vehicle. And when we've brought that understanding together, and our understanding of the world as well, so that is our ability to make predictions about what other people are doing. So we've seen a pedestrian who's looking at the side of the road. It's a reasonable expectation that they might step out. They might not, but they might not have seen you. They might step out. You're prepared to slow down. We have that understanding of the way people behave. And so we use that to then plan our actions, and to implement those actions, it's very simple. We use our hands and our feet, steering wheel, pedal controls, speed up, slow down, steer left, steer right. It's more or less as simple as that. There's communication as well through the indicators and the horn, but other than that, we're pretty much, that's what we need to do. For a self-driving car, it's a different set of sensors, collecting similar information maybe, but it's collecting all of that information and then feeding that to computers, which collate it, process that data, and then decide what to do next. Now, they may have knowledge of the rules, they may be programmed with the rules of the road, or they may have learnt the rules of the road through a kind of deep learning process by being exposed to stimuli of driving, and then learning what the right things to do are in each situation. And then computing their actions, again, applying the outputs of the computation to the vehicle controls to cause the vehicle to drive. So in terms of safety, I mean, hands up if you think you're a 10 out of 10 driver. No? Just me? 5 out of 10? Also me? 1 out of 10? Also me. We vary, right? Like, some days I know I'm a good driver, some days I know I'm not so good, tired, if I'm tired, long drive, whatever else, frustrated, angry, whatever. Sometimes my driving is definitely opposite. So there's definitely variance in performance. So that's one reason why self-driving vehicles should be better than humans. But there's many others as well. So we get distracted, we get tired and inattentive, whether that's distraction or through fatigue. Many of the deaths on our roads are a result of intoxication through drugs, alcohol misuse, simple aging process, loss of sensory capability, and just mistakes. We make mistakes, and those sometimes result in collisions. So hopefully, self-driving cars can avoid a lot of those, but I think that's where a lot of people make the mistake that because self-driving vehicles don't experience any of those factors, they'll eliminate human error. Well, actually, that human error might appear elsewhere in the system. It could be through programming errors. We may not understand the durability of the hardware to deliver self-driving capability. What does it mean for a LiDAR system that you depend on to get hot and cold every day? Hot and cold, automotive grade quality. Do they have that built in? Is there algorithmic bias in the training data that the vehicle has been exposed to? Has that seen everything it needs to in order to be able to understand how to drive in what is an infinitely variable environment? Every day, the vehicle itself is different. The tyres, the brakes have different level of performance. The traffic levels will be different every day. Pedestrians you encounter will be different. The weather conditions will be different every day. Is it capable of dealing with that unpredictable environment? Now I'm going to show an image of a vehicle. It's not self-driving. It's not self-driving, but they do call it full self-driving. It's marketed as having a full self-driving capability, but it can't do that yet. It has a very advanced driving assist system, but they're going to use it for a couple of examples of why, firstly, why self-driving is a good thing, but secondly, why sometimes there might be some issues with it. So the first video is, so I'll play on the click. In this video, it's from 2015, I think, 2015, and it's called Tesla Saves the Day. It's on YouTube. The driver does nothing in this clip, so there's no interaction by the driver with the vehicle in this drive. We're going down a wet US road, and I think it's this vehicle here, coming the opposite direction, turns across. So we'll see what happens. So the driver's distracted, doesn't do anything, vehicle slows down, even though it's wet, perfect emergency stop maneuver, and then continues driving. Brilliant. That's exactly what we want our self-driving technology to be doing. But the second Tesla example is, I think, one of the reasons why 2016 was the peak of inflated expectations and why we started to go into the trough of disillusionment. So this was a crash resulted in the death of Joshua Brown. The Tesla was traveling east on USA Route 27A, and there was a truck coming in the opposite direction which turned across the path of this dual carriageway into this side road, and the vehicle was set in autopilot mode at 74 miles per hour on a 65 mile per hour limit road. Questions there. It's trivial for the vehicle to know what the speed limit was on that road. Why was it possible to set the speed at significantly above that? Beside the point. Anyway, the vehicle should still be able to stop ahead of this truck which had pulled across. The vehicle gave several warnings to the driver. The driver didn't make any interaction with the controls whatsoever. Hit the trailer of the vehicle, went under the trailer, and then came to rest 300 meters later on a utility pole, a telegraph pole, further down the road. This is the view from the truck, if you like. So the truck was following the path of the yellow dots, and the Tesla came from the other direction and collided with the trailer. You can see, obviously, catastrophic damage to the Tesla, fatal for the driver, and you see the impact of the A-pillars on the trailer of the truck. Now, the original collision investigation essentially said the driver had agreed to all of the disclaimers in the operation of the autopilot system. Therefore, they were at fault. It's nothing to do with Tesla. But there was a follow-up investigation by NTSB, National Transportation Safety Board in the US, and they were more critical. They said, Tesla, you've created a system where the driver can be inattentive and would expect the vehicle to respond to the environment around it, and there's no checks to make sure that the driver is paying attention as they should be. It's a driver assist system, it's not a self-driving system. So you have contributed to the risk that has resulted in this fatal crash. But we're starting to see issues emerging in the kind of grey area between automation and human driving. And a second example, again, part of the slide down into the trough of disillusionment, a famous one, the death of Elaine Herzberg in Tempe, Arizona. This is an Uber test vehicle, Volvo XC90. It's got all the sensors on board. Now, Uber had disabled the inbuilt pedestrian braking system that Volvo fits to these vehicles because it didn't want conflict between their self-driving system and the Volvo system. Elaine Herzberg, this isn't a crossing at this point, but you can see it kind of looks like it should be, but you can understand a pedestrian wanting to cross at this point because of the way this path is set out. Anyway, we've got the videos. So firstly, the exterior view from the forward-facing camera on the Volvo, and then the interior view looking at the safety driver. So this was a test vehicle with a safety driver on board whose responsibility it was to check that the vehicle was behaving itself and intervening should that become necessary. So we've got the exterior view, Elaine Herzberg coming from the left-hand side, and there's the fatal impact. And then we look from the interior view, so looking at the safety driver, you'll notice she doesn't look ahead very much in this video. There's been accusations that she was just playing on her phone, watching a movie or something. She has claimed that she was part of her task, that job requirements was to be noting down what the vehicle was doing as it was driving along its test route. So yeah, some conflict there about what was going on, but let's see. So you can see looking down, looking around, not really fully attentive, and then the vehicle collides with the pedestrian. So again, you could immediately blame the safety driver for not paying attention. But you can imagine that she's probably been doing this role day after day after day. The vehicle's done the right thing day after day after day. It's no surprise that she wasn't paying attention as she should have been in order to keep the vehicle safe. So yeah, again, this kind of grey area between automated control and human control, presenting new safety risks that weren't predicted. Now, so what's been going on in the UK? Well, this is sort of latest news update. This is from this month, the King's Speech. I've heard it said, the UK is the only place where the monarch arrives in a horse-drawn golden carriage to tell the public they can drive in self-driving vehicles. So yeah, this was from the King's Speech, and I've got the clip here.
My ministers will introduce new legal frameworks to support the safe commercial development of emerging industries, such as self-driving vehicles.
So that was quite exciting that he actually mentioned self-driving vehicles in the estate opening of Parliament earlier this month. But I think it equally applies to Darren's technology as well, talking about emerging technologies. I think it's sort of promoting the idea that the UK can be a leader in this sector. And he talked about regulatory frameworks for self-driving. Now, in August of last year, the government set out its expectation of how safe these vehicles should be. They said it should be at least as good as a competent and careful driver. So in law, there's no definition of what competent and careful driver means. There's only a judge's assessment of when a driver has fallen below the standard of a careful and competent driver. That's driving without due care and attention, or dangerous driving, which is where you're well below that standard. But a competent and careful driver is higher than that of the average driver. So if you looked across the whole population, some of us will be tired, some of us will be distracted. A competent and careful driver is above that average standard. But the Transport Select Committee reflected on that, and they said it's too weak and too vague. So I think for that exact reason, because there's no definition of what competent and careful means, it's not a good ambition for the capability of self-driving vehicles. So the government should set a clearer, more stretching threshold. Now, in response to that, government rejected that recommendation, quite unusual for a select committee report, but they said that basically that the competent and careful ambition is an appropriate one at this time. So let's explore what that might mean. So across Great Britain, in 2022, this is the Department for Transport statistics, there were 1,711 fatalities. About 5 people a day die on our roads. Far too many. But that comes through 323 billion miles of motorised traffic. There's a lot of driving goes on, basically 1 billion miles a day of driving. So there are about 189 million miles per fatality. Right? However, that includes motorbikes, an objectively higher risk mode. You're more likely to die on a motorbike than you are in a car. It includes the kind of human factors of fatigue, distraction, intoxication, so on. So we can adjust these stats. If we're only looking at fatalities where it was a car, so this is only looking at car traffic, and we take out the ones where human error was a factor, we're down to 110 fatalities, and that comes from the car traffic of 244 billion miles per year. So it's now 2.2 billion miles per fatality. That's an incredibly high standard that we're expecting self-driving cars to surpass in order to be shown to be competent and careful. So very challenging for a developer to be able to prove that their vehicles have achieved that standard. You'd have to take my word for it. There was research in 2016 from Calvert and Paddock. This is people from the RAND research organization in the US. They said autonomous vehicles would have to be driven hundreds of millions and sometimes hundreds of billions of miles to demonstrate their statistical reliability in terms of injuries and fatalities. So again, if we do some quick maths on that statistic, if you were required to produce 100 billion miles of driving with a test fleet of 100 vehicles, and you were somehow able to keep those vehicles operating 24 hours a day, 7 days a week at 30 miles per hour, it would take you 33 million hours to cover 100 billion miles. 33 million hours, which is 1.4 million days, which is about 4 millennia. So we're going to have to find different ways to prove that our vehicles are safe, to have that confidence that they are surpassing that standard of being careful and competent. I was fortunate enough this year to go to the Automated Road Transport Symposium, which was held in San Francisco. It's the biggest conference on this topic. And it's amazing, right? So despite all my I've been quite negative and quite cautious about self-driving cars up to this point, you can stand on a street corner for 2 minutes and you will see one of these vehicles come past. Waymo and Cruise, both operating vehicles without drivers at the controls. Others, WeRide, Zoox, and other organizations have vehicles with test drivers inside. But Waymo and Cruise, in a busy urban environment with fare-paying customers, taking people on their journeys in a defined area. It's incredible. But the image on the right is something that, it's really jarring that you see these incredibly expensive, flashy, sensor-laden vehicles alongside terrible poverty, drug misuse, mental health problems on the streets of San Francisco. And you start to wonder, have we got our priorities right here, investing in this technology when there are clearly some other problems that we have to address. And these kind of societal friction, I think, is part of the reason why Cruise has had such problems over the last couple of months, and why there's been a bit of a backlash against self-driving vehicles in San Francisco. So one example of these kind of points of friction is where a Waymo vehicle blocked a fire engine that was going to an emergency. You can just about see in the photo, the fire engine was coming round this corner and the Waymo was coming up the hill. The Waymo vehicle didn't know how to reverse to get out of its way. It was blocked for a short time. A remote operator intervened, moved the Waymo out of the way, and the truck, the fire engine continued. So some of these little issues emerging, and then a slightly amusing one, a cruise vehicle drove into wet concrete, got stuck. And you start to see how this gets reported as well. So in the Mail, it's sort of quite excited and pleased about this technology failing. So talking about the overjoyed construction worker saying it's creepy and weird. So yes, it's starting to get this kind of pushback against what is ultimately a potentially very beneficial technology. And that's really captured by the activity of a social action group called Safe Street Rebel, and there's a US news item I can play about that now. And this was going on while I was in San Francisco.
No one's in it.
Marking autonomous vehicles as traffic hazards. The group Safe Street Rebels is placing cones on Cruise and Waymo cars as a way to temporarily stop them. They want these cars off the road permanently.
Expanded and basically unfettered access to the city streets is a really bad idea.
This person is a member of the Safe Street Rebels and asked us not to share their identity. The group calls the protest the Week of Cone. It is happening ahead of next week's vote by the State Public Utilities Commission on whether to allow Cruise and Waymo to expand their services in the city.
Residents never actually got a chance to have a say in this and never really consented to being used as human guinea pigs.
ABC7 has documented issues with Cruise and Waymo. Just recently, 2 Waymo cars stalled near the Pride Parade downtown, backing up traffic. The San Francisco Fire Department has criticized Cruise for cars blocking emergency units. According to the group, using a traffic cone on top of the car disables it. And since they feel like they are traffic hazards, they think using a cone is a good way to send a message.
So yeah, this action group speaking for what they see as an imposition of this technology on the people of San Francisco. And I mean, Darren probably knows from a university perspective, others here as well. If you want to do any kind of research, you have to think about informed consent. None of the residents of San Francisco have given their informed consent about the deployment of this experimental technology on their streets. So this tension is something that I think needs more work by the companies developing the systems. There's a well-known safety researcher, Phil Koopman, from Carnegie Mellon, and he put a post on LinkedIn about this, and I'll read it out. Every blocked traffic incident is going to add to degrading public opinion and enthusiasm for the technology, regardless of which company is having the problem. So whether it's Cruise having a problem, Waymo gets affected. You know, one sneeze and everyone gets a cold. Regardless of which company is having the problems. When a large adverse event eventually happens, this crash will happen at some stage, all that pent-up public opinion is going to make it much more difficult for companies to deal with the situation. More transparency and improvement on issues the public cares about are essential. This technology will not succeed without trust, and it is much easier to lose trust than it is easier to lose trust with a bad single event than it is to regain it afterwards. And that was in September. And then in October, the bad event happened. Didn't take long. So there was an incident, and it wasn't a Cruise vehicle that caused the crash. So there was a pedestrian walked into the road. There was a hit and run. Human-driven vehicle hit the pedestrian and knocked them into the adjacent lane, and the Cruise vehicle then hit the pedestrian as a secondary collision, completely unavoidable by the self-driving vehicle. Meanwhile, the human-driven vehicle that caused it went off, never got caught. However, if the Cruise vehicle had stopped, everything would have been fine. But it attempted to get out of the way of traffic and ended up dragging the pedestrian under it for 20 feet, and they're seriously injured. And again, that almost would have been the end of it if they'd been open and honest about what had happened. But they actually weren't totally transparent with the Department of Motor Vehicles, the California Department of Motor Vehicles, who were investigating it. And so they had to withdraw their vehicles from operation, and ultimately the CEO resigned from Cruise, and they're sort of figuring out how they're going to re-enter the market with this technology. A really serious incident, and speak to this point about trust from the public. Now, one of the best presentations at the conference this year was from this guy, Jeff Tumlin, who is from the San Francisco Municipal Transit Agency, so the transport authority for San Francisco. And he set out 6 priorities for deployment of self-driving vehicles. So, can we move, firstly, can they allow us to move more people? Can we get, for the same number of vehicles, can we get more people moving from their origins to their desired destinations? Will they reduce emissions? Will they help improve the environment? Will they improve people's transport choices, stop people from taking individual privately owned vehicles more towards shared transportation? And also, will they encourage people to use walking and cycling? If the vehicles are safer, will they help people to think about maybe cycling rather than using a motorised mode? Will they improve safety? I think that's a given. They have to improve safety. But even if they improved overall safety, if things got worse for pedestrians and cyclists, that wouldn't be acceptable. So they need to improve safety, especially for vulnerable road users. And then the last 2 about can we create performance metrics that we share to understand that the vehicles are genuinely improving life for the city. And this point about sharing metrics is one I want to develop a little bit here, in the next video. So next video, I'm afraid we're back to Tesla again. Again, it's not self-driving, but it's operating in its FSD mode, what they call full self-driving. And I want you to watch the video. I'm going to let it play a couple of times and see if you can see what the issue is in the video. Okay. That's it. That's all. I'll let it play again. So here we go again. Did you see what the issue was there? Exactly. So there was a marked pedestrian crossing. There was a pedestrian using the crossing. There was a sign here saying yield for pedestrians. The car knew about the crossing and it had detected the pedestrian on that crossing. So if I was the DFT in the UK, I'd want to know how many times that was happening, and I'd want to say what Tesla were doing to help to prevent this from happening in future. So as a way to understand that, work I've been doing for BSI, British Standards Institution, is based around the concept of commentary driving. Commentary driving is a technique used for expert driver training and assessment. So if you're going to do your police or a fire engine or ambulance driver training, you do this thing called commentary driving. And you sit with the instructor, and as you drive along the road, you're explaining everything you're seeing that is going to influence how you drive. I've seen there's a 30-mile-per-hour speed limit ahead. I'm going to slow down, make sure the vehicle's going 30. I've just seen there's a vehicle put its reversing lights on. I'm going to wait just to see if they're going to pull out of their driveway. The pedestrian looks like it goes on and on like that. And then, so they're assessing, have you seen the critical information you need to? Have you adapted the behavior of the vehicle correctly in response to that? So that's the kind of inspiration for what we call digital commentary driving. Now, this isn't saying the vehicle should have a verbal description of what it's doing, but you should be able to record or collect from the vehicle the data that gives you the sense that it saw everything it needed to see and was doing everything it needed to do in order to drive safely. So its perceptions, its decisions and its actions in response. And that should be produced in a standardized format. So whether it's a Waymo, a Cruise, a Zoox, an Oxa, a Wave vehicle, whichever of these companies, they should produce the data in a standardized format, because this is the sort of information that any driver would need to have to drive carefully and competently. And we think it's a reasonable ask for the companies to produce that data. So that's, I think this could be one element of what the government requires in its framework for safe and careful and competent driving. And couldn't finish the presentation without talking about cybersecurity. Of course, that whole element about trust, if your vehicle isn't secure in that way, it won't be trusted and therefore it won't be adopted. And of course, I don't have to explain to this audience, but you never solve cybersecurity, you mitigate risk as far as is reasonable or as far as is possible. And you keep building more and more defenses to potential attacks. I think it's something that's underappreciated today. I think the companies are so focused on getting vehicles that drive, that they're not thinking about the cybersecurity challenges that are faced by their vehicles. I think it's something they will need to partner with good research organisations, good companies that are working in this space to help them deliver. But you will well know it's not the greatest idea to develop your system and then go to someone and say, please, can you make this secure for me? You would have wanted to have the involvement from the start. So yeah, something to think about there. Now, it could be catastrophic. It could be that someone interferes with the vehicle, cause a crash, kind of terrorist type action. Or it could just be incredibly disruptive. So we're near Heathrow here, fairly near. If you went and caused two vehicles to stop in the tunnels off the M4 spur road into Heathrow Airport, traffic backs up onto the M25 in about 3 minutes if you have a blockage at that point. And that's incredibly disruptive to the country. So it just could be really annoying and disruptive to the company. So yeah, to the country. So yeah, cybersecurity really, really important. And BSI is doing work on this. There's a PAS standard on the fundamentals of automotive cybersecurity. And the last point I wanted to make is on language. Now, this is from a story that was in the Times around the release of Ford's Blue Cruise system. Now, the Blue Cruise system is a feature on the Mustang Mach-E. They're a nice electric vehicle. And Ford were really careful and really diligent in their description of this system. It's a hands-free driver assistance system. It's not self-driving, it's not automated driving, it's a driver assistance system. The driver has to be at the controls, ready to take over. They can take their hands off, but they're monitored to make sure they're paying attention. And this video is on the Times website, their review. No hands at 70 miles an hour. I tried the UK's first self-driving car. Come on. And his summation of the video at the end is on 2,500 miles of road in England, Scotland and Wales, that's the motorway network, this car, once you're on the motorway, will completely drive itself. This is like irresponsible, really is. This is exactly causing the sorts of issues that we've seen involving Tesla. It's not self-driving. It's not the first self-driving car. Will it completely drive itself? No, it won't. So just got to be really careful on language. And that's another area of work I've been doing for BSI. This is what they call a CAM vocabulary, Connected and Automated Mobility vocabulary, standardized terms and definitions, industry involvement, public consultation. I thought I would, the first version had about 80 terms in it. I thought that would be kind of 80%, 90% done. But no, there's been more and more terms added. We're into the 6th version now, well over 100 terms. And yeah, starting to build that standardization of how we describe these technologies, how we describe what they do and how they work. So just to conclude, I still think, I'm still very positive about this technology. I still think it has huge potential to improve the safety of our roads, the efficiency of our transportation system, and the accessibility of transport. People who are blind, disabled, I think it could enable them to have independent mobility to a much greater extent than they do today. However, there's no evidence yet. There's some promising stuff from Waymo in terms of what their research has, what their operations to date have achieved. But yeah, we're certainly nowhere near the 100 billion miles that might be needed to statistically prove that safety. Digital commentary driving might help us get there, but more work is certainly needed. And that links to the next question. How far should we go to try to encourage this technology to be deployed? Well, I think what we should be doing is doing everything we can to make the roads as safe as possible for human drivers and let the technology adapt to that. Don't do things to support the deployment of the technology which is unproven. Let's keep making the roads as safe as possible for human drivers, for human cyclists, for people who walk, people who wheel. And then if the technology can't deal with that, it's not ready for prime time. Let's focus on the human needs for now, until we get that evidence, and then we might do stuff to facilitate the deployment of AVs, but we're not at that point yet. And what do we do? Well, we need to understand what the companies are doing to develop and deploy this technology, the Waymos, the Cruises, in the UK, Oxa and Wave, Conidigital, Origo, many companies working in this space. We need to keep close to the regulators, the DFT, the VCA, Vehicle Certification Agency, DVSA, Driving and Vehicle Standards Agency. How are they working to regulate this technology? Are they taking into account all of the sorts of concerns that the people of San Francisco have had about the technology? And then we need to keep close to people. What do they actually want? Do they actually want this technology to be out on the roads? I think it has a huge benefit, but I think we need to tell that story and make sure when it is deployed, people actually want it and embrace it, and we get as full benefit from it as possible. So that concludes the presentation. Thank you very much for your attention, and I look forward to the questions. Thank you.